All right. Well, welcome back to the dispatch. So super excited. We have Derek here with South Snohomish County. So Derek, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I've been at South County Fire for just about 20 years. Kind of focused most of my career, especially the last about 8 years on engine company operations. And that kind of got me into the spec world and getting our next generation of pumpers and kind of planning for the future. So yeah, I've been a firefighter since 1999 and I don't do truck work, and engine stuff's my focus. And I guess that's why I'm here for Pierce.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate it. You've been to Pierce before?
I have.
Okay, very good.
But I think last year was my first time. So this may be my third or fourth time here.
Third or fourth time. All
Yeah.
right. Always Appleton? You've been to Bradenton
Nope,
before? Any of those?
only Appleton.
Always
This
Appleton.
This is where we've been.
Awesome. Well, welcome back. We appreciate you having here. So what got you started in the fire service? You said you've been doing it since 99. How'd you catch the bug?
So it's easy. I came by it, honestly, for me, with family. So my grandfather worked at a neighboring agency. In fact, my Hughes rep worked for, before he retired and became a Hughes rep for Pierce. He worked at the same department, which is Snohomish County Fire District 7. So my grandfather was there for 49 years till the day he died. I grew up listening to a pager and listening to the radio.
Sure.
And I guess since I was like 5, that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So at 18, I went in, had a little bit of a rocky start, but pulled through, and I've been a firefighter since 99. And yeah, now I'm an old man, and all the jokes that played on all the older guys when I was a kid, they're all coming back to haunt me.
And they're doing it to you now.
I know. And everyone calls me dad. And it's just
circle of life.
It's circle of life.
That's
it's rough.
rough.
But I don't feel bad for me. I deserve every second of it. So, yeah.
Well, that's
kind of how I got here.
Well, that's awesome. So tell me how the journey into getting into the committee and how you said you've never done the truck stuff, always been an engine person. How was that getting on doing the spec writing and those elements?
Yeah. So just to give you a quick background for us, after the UL studies came out in about 17, and there's just been some changes in firefighting, right? Because we have more data and science than we've ever had. So me and a group of people in our department, we kind of took onto this new science on how to fight fire, right? So a huge mentor of ours and somebody who actually helped us in the spec process, his name is Dennis Laguerre. He talked a lot to us about spec and layout drives strategy and tactics. So if you wanted to be an apartment that, focuses on the first line and has bulk beds and all these different kind of hose loads, well, then your truck has to be spec'd, right? Your engine has to be spec'd to be able to do those things. Like, you can't be a bulk bed department and expect to build a 3,000 gallon engine.
Right.
Right. I mean, because then your hose beds are high up in the air and you can't reach the hose to stretch it quickly. So when you realize that spec and layout really drives your business, then you have to take a look at, well, where's our spec at? And then another thing is just a huge piece of advice for anybody spec'ing. Like, if you're comfortable with your spec that you come up with, you've spec'd the wrong engine, because these are 20-year commitments, right?
Sure.
So you've got to spec it to be good now, but you also have to have a rig that's going to be good for you in 15 to 20 years. So that's just kind of how we did this. Is we almost did the task level side first,
Okay.
and then realized that our engines needed to change to support the task side, which then in turn, obviously, tactical and strategic levels that we do on the fire ground, they're all based off this rig and our current spec. It makes us a little uncomfortable.
Sure.
It's a little bit for the future. Half my guys are going to hate us, right? That's okay. I'm sure you've heard firefighters. There's two things we don't like: the way things are and change.
Right.
And so anytime you change anything, I promise you, half of them are going to be like, oh my gosh, you guys are heroes. The other half are going to be like, look at these idiots.
Yeah.
Right. But either way, we spec'd a rig based off of where we are and where we're headed. So
Sure.
I think our group's super proud of that.
That's cool. And you mentioned, so you sounds like you guys do some outside consulting. You said Dennis.
Yes.
You mentioned your Hughes rep, those kinds of things. So do you work with a lot of outside consultants then as you're coming through there? Because I think that's an interesting concept too to some departments, of instead of saying, hey, we know what's best, let's bring somebody in from the outside who does this all full time.
Yeah, I would say, we're really lucky, right?
Yeah.
Our department is very talented. Our agency puts a lot into its people. We have these groups, they're called TAG groups, which is a technical advisory group. So they're kind of like committees, but they give us a little bit more teeth, and they trust a lot in their own in-house subject matter experts, which is awesome, right? But it's easy to get caught in your own world. We're one of the we're the biggest department in our county, but we're one of the bigger players in the region. I think we're 4th or 5th largest department in the state of Washington. So it's easy to like get caught up in your own stuff, I guess. So really bringing on a consultant was just, like there's known knowns and things you think you know, but you're wrong about. And I was actually, we were pretty close as a group, but there were some things that we weren't correct about. That bringing in that outside influence was humongous for us. So really, I think that for us, it was to make sure that we were doing things correctly, right? I mean, again, 20-year commitments, like you want to have these things right.
Yeah.
Because it's yours.
But that
You
phrase
own
of
it.
being a little bit uncomfortable, that is such good advice, not even just for spec, right? I mean, we think of that when you talk about on-site consultants, those elements of it. Like when we went through the Ascendant project here.
Yeah.
I don't, my bad, engine guy.
No, you're
talking
good.
trucks,
That's okay.
My bad.
I secretly rode a truck for 4 years.
Oh,
But keep
yeah.
going. Just don't tell. That's it.
Secret safe on the
Yeah,
dispatch.
obviously.
Yeah, you're fine.
We won't tell anybody.
But the when they went through that with the Ascendant product here, a lot of it was like having the forethought to ask somebody outside of the fire industry for advice. And they did that where they brought in like architectural engineers and things like that, and people that said, you can never get an aerial past 75 feet on a single axle until you brought someone in who just had a blank canvas. That's neat to hear, even on the customer side, bringing those consultants in and saying and challenging the way you're thinking. But that phrase of if you're not a little bit uncomfortable, you're not doing it right that's powerful.
Yeah, thanks.
So well, tell me a little bit more about South County. So call volume, location. You mentioned it's one of the largest ones there in Washington. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so South County Fire, we are a regional fire authority. So we're a lot of smaller different agencies that have come together to make one larger department. So we're located just north of Seattle. I think there's one department in between the city of Seattle Fire Department and where South County's southern border is. And it's about, I want to say it's like 5 miles away. So in my career, when I worked the South End, like we get our fires where you can have like Seattle Fire, South County Fire, Shoreline Fire, like a bunch of different agencies in one little corner. So we're just north of the city of Seattle. Obviously, things in Washington State, like real estate values, everything's getting crazy. So no one wants to buy in Seattle. So now we are going crazy in our county, right? We have a light rail going in to kind of help with our terrible traffic in the area. And so that is producing growth. We're going vertical instead of lateral as they build. So it's a super ever-changing area, which is pretty fun to be a part of on the fire side. We protect about 300,000 people, run about 40,000 calls a year. We are currently 15 fire stations. When I started, I was trying to remember, like I was part of original Fire District 1, but a bunch of different cities have now joined in and made this one big fire department to stop the duplication of effort. And yeah, I mean, anytime you merge things together, it took us a minute to get there. But yeah, you couldn't get me out of this fire department. Like we're in the sweet spot right now. We're in the pocket to where like 15 stations, almost 400 people. You still know everybody for the most part. So we're big enough to have some of those big department niceties and big department problems, but small enough still to where you still kind of know everybody, still get to hang out with everybody. So it's a really, really great place to work. I would say most people at our department would feel the same way. And when you could pay me double, and I'm not going, I got 9 years left and I retire and you couldn't get me out.
That's awesome. Well, when you talked about the consolidation between the departments, what's that like on the apparatus side?
Oh my gosh. Well, bad and good. So we're kind of past the weird section, I guess I would say. So, we had some of our stuff, like some of the late 90s stuff got a little weird, but the good news is regionally, like, although we were not together, we all got along really well, right? Like, so I think there was a lot of influence because the rigs were more similar than you would expect. But yeah, so definitely challenging, right? Especially for us, like we changed our entire hose package on our hose loads and how they're loaded and just the ideology of how we stretch lines on the fire ground. And to be a part of that and then do that on 6 different specs. Yeah. Challenging for sure. But we were able to get there. And I think in our fleet, we only have 1 engine currently out of I think we have 20 engines total counting reserves. I think we have 1 engine where it has a couple of different hose loads, cause it has to, right? Based off of its spec and layout, cause it's wasn't changeable, right? It's a fixed factor. And so that's like, to be able to have that many different agencies come together and be able to do things the same way, we kind of just luck of the draw, I guess.
You can only imagine that. I mean, again, business elements, when we do those types of things and growth, there's challenges with that, but it's the only option. You know what I mean? In those situations, like it's either you figure out how to adapt and do this and continue serving, or you don't. And that's awesome.
Well, it's kind of what we're good at, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's what we have to be good at. Like, just figure it out. Like, you're not going to like it all. I don't like it all. I don't like everything. Right? I don't like everything we do. There's things I wish we did better. But it's our job to figure it out. Like, whatever you give us, we're problem solvers. Like, I don't know, like take the problem, find the most logical answer, and then start doing something, right? Take action on it. So
Do you think your seniority helps when you were talking about like half the people come back and half the firefighter mad? I mean, that's a tough spot to be in. Like, you know what I mean? When you come back, and I'm trying to think of, okay, when you came in 99, if you'd got thrown on this apparatus committee, what a nightmare that would have been.
no.
So, I mean, like with that seniority, does that help with that? And part of it is probably even like the comfort of making the decision on behalf of the whole department and standing up and sticking with it.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. So when this all started, I was like right at the halfway point of my career. I was like a 15-year full-time person at this department. So it's kind of like I still spend with the young guys. I also teach a lot through Academy. In fact, most people that were a part of this engine spec build were the type of people that train the next generation. We sign up for the short 6-hour overtimes versus just going to sit in a fire station. Like, we're putting in the real work with these people. So like, we spend with the younger crowd, which is good. I'm just not quite old enough to be like, oh my gosh, I wish he wasn't, he's lame. I still don't understand half the words they say. But then around long enough to where the guys with 30 years on the job are like, oh, okay, well, yeah, Roberts has been around for a minute. Like, we like that guy. So yeah, I guess like the seniority part it's part of it. But I also think our group, like our entire engine group, no matter how long we've been here in our group that helps spec this rig, we put in the work. So we're in the trenches with the people of our fire department. But yeah, I would say obviously young, like there was no way I could lead this group 10 years ago. I wasn't mature enough. I wasn't where I am in my career today. And I'm not afraid to make a decision. And we try to make decisions based off of facts or data. We, in the spec, we like to ask like the whys first, right? Then we get to the how we're going to build the rig to support the whys, which I think is a big part of it. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're transitioning perfectly. Let's talk a little bit about those design priorities that you guys have. So what are some of the priorities you have as you're speccing a pumper out?
So this is where, when we talked about doing this podcast, this is the part that meant the most to me, because I think it's how we got our rig so close to where we want to be and still be a little uncomfortable for the future.
Sure.
So the biggest thing is we sat down as a group with Hughes, which we talk about the pre-con, right? Like, oh my gosh, there's so many meetings that happen before, and people know this that have spec'd rigs, like literally whiteboards and all sorts of things. So we sat down, like, you got to be realistic. Like, you can't be in the middle of nowhere in the country and spec an urban fire pumper with a 500-gallon tank, right? But you also probably shouldn't be in an urban area with a big old 3,000-gallon double axle, like pumper, tender, engine, whatever, right? So we sat down and we're like, okay, why does this engine exist? Like, this seems very simple, like probably too simple. But why does this exist? Well, life safety is the number one priority in the American Fire Service. I've yet to meet a fire department where it isn't, right? And then it's property conservation, incident stabilization, right? So we just wrote that on the corner of the whiteboard when we sat down on our pre-meeting with the guys from Hughes and with our own internal group. And it was like, and then we brought our consultant in, right? It's like, okay, this is why it exists. So for us, then you go to that pumper. So how does this engine support that mission? Well, it's pretty simple from an engine's perspective, right? Like, why do we exist on the fire ground? Well, to put the fire out. Okay, so what's the most important piece of that? Well, there's a lot of most important pieces, but the first hose line, is the most important piece of the engine company's fire ground tasks, right? So we were like, well, then we should probably have very easily accessible hand lines, right? And for us, that's off the back, right? Pulling off the back, low hose beds was ridiculously important to us. We have a department culture where we pull past the fire so that we get 3 sides of it. It also opens up the front of the building for ladder trucks, medic units if there's victims, things like that. And we have lots of hose, and we use bulk beds, which means it's not a pre-selected amount of hose. You stretch the right amount of hose every time. So when we went down this path, it's like, well, the hand line, right? The hand line and the water in the tank, in our group's opinion, was the best way that we could support the incident priorities, which is life safety. It always has been. It always will be if the fire service wants to continue to exist, right? So once we did that, it was like, those were our non-negotiables. So then we went down this path of like using the data and science for that, which was, well, why do we have 500-gallon tanks? I found out we had 500-gallon tanks because we ordered them that way. We always got by with 500, and 500 was pretty close. But then we went back through our own internal data, and we found this like 30% of the time we were running out of tank water right before the hydrant was being charged. So we're like, okay, well then why don't we do something about that? Right? And it's like, well, you could just do a custom tank with the space that's left. I'm new to the spec process. I had no idea. I thought they came in 500, 750, and 1,000. I had no idea they could just take the space that's left and make you a custom tank, or say, hey, you know, like it can go this way. We could move things this way or that way. Our consultant, Dennis, explained making an engine as a balloon animal. Like you can squeeze it over here, but it's going to pop out somewhere else, right? Like it's a great analogy. So to get what we wanted, we gave up a little bit of depth of our hose bed. We had to go a little taller than we wanted. But again, the tank and the hose bed, #1 priorities for us, right? Because that gets us off the rig. Like we're one of those departments where the first line in the offensive strategy, like first line off the rig, off tank water, we don't care about supply. We have a really big force of people coming behind us pretty rapidly. Like within 6 minutes, our first alarm usually is on scene. That's on our own internal data. So we get help quickly. And so we wanted to just focus on that first hand line, getting to the scene of the fire to get in between, you know, the victims or potential trapped occupants, you know, and us in there to put the fire out. I think we're getting to the point where like, I don't know that this fire service needs to go as custom as we've been in the past. I think that maybe in the past, everyone like fighting fire was like kind of regional. So it's like, well, these guys do this because on this one fire, this one time in '84, you know, Chief Bob so-and-so said this worked and we did this and we did that. Like, I actually think the fire service is becoming more similar than different. And it's kind of more, what buildings do you protect? How large are you? What's your staffing? Who's coming? Who's not coming? Sure. So I think those things I think should narrow down how complex we've made building fire engines.
And I think there's an interesting element to your description of the why and how you walked through your approach to the fire determines your spec. And so if you're driving by, so we're gonna go and we're gonna do based on how the hose loads are gonna go. Do you think that some of that commonization of firefighting tactics also leads to the ability to have more, I don't want to say standardized, but more similar apparatus?
I think it does. I mean, scientific studies and data is a great way to make sure that you're doing business correctly, if you will, right? But as you know, science and data is only as good as the question you ask it, right? Like if the question was, how do I build the cheapest fire engine possible? It sure wouldn't be the one we built, right? Because we made it custom and spec'd, like you would have to give and give and give. So the science and data, it's a very deep question because then you have to go back to what are our capabilities, and each agency is different there. So yes, I think it could make us more alike and make our builds more alike. And I think it should in the future. Yeah. But we're still, you know, there's still a lot to get over, I think, to get it there. I would guess that's where it's headed.
Yeah. And so as you're seeing that, like using your department as an example, how has that evolved over time? Like you mentioned, like, hey, we went through and this was the approach on this one, but what actually changed from your previous builds to this one? Because I know you said the tank size certainly changed. Any other thing?
Yeah, quite a bit actually, significantly different. So again, we wrote that on the board as we were doing our build deal, and we ended up like 4 or 5 whiteboards deep of just solid information. And every time we had, a discrepancy or where we didn't agree on something, we'd just go right back to life safety. So for us, as we've gotten bigger, and I think as departments get bigger, you start to separate engine and truck functions, right? So the task level. So in my past of starting back in the day, we didn't have the same responses. We didn't have the same staffing. So you kind of had to be this jack of all trades, master of none, versus now I feel like we're large enough and we're growing enough to let's let engine people be really good at engine work and let's let the trucks focus on truck. So for us, we like same thing. Like once we went through the water and the tank size on that, it was like, okay, what's the next, what else is important for life safety? Well, ladders, right? Like ladder access is important. We always ran hydraulic arms that were ladder racks that came down from the top, right? Which you can't get something for nothing. So when you have something like that, like, yes, you get them up out of the way, you gain more space, you get more compartment space, but now it takes a while to get the ladder, right? Like you can't get it for free. So we said, well, if life safety is the number one priority, besides putting the fire out, the next most important thing we could do is remove them from the fire. So we went back, got rid of compartments and put low side ladders on. So we've got ladders right on the fender, which eliminated half of the compartments on the officer side. That's a huge change for us. And I'm sure, and that requires deciding what equipment do we really need, right? And for getting to be a more urban fire department as we grow and things are getting more densely populated and going vertical. And, we've got cranes hanging everywhere, building, 10, 12, whatever story buildings popping up all over the place. We have to change for the future of the fire service. And that meant getting rid of some of equipment and just changing the priorities of that rig. So I would say like some significant changes. A lot of equipment is being removed from our fire engine, as opposed to being like a rescue pumper that had a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and using that balloon animal analogy, so when you squeeze the balloon animal there, changed your ladder rack, move the ladders down, decrease some compartment space. What was the give and take there? How'd you change Like, did you have to go different everywhere then on your compartment space?
Yeah, kinda. So what we ended up doing for us is on the driver's side, back compartment where it is full height. We ended up making that kind of our rescue and or truck compartment, if you will. The nice part is so much has changed and batteries powered things have become so much better. So battery powered hydraulic tools, like each engine used to have an entire full set of tools, right? Well, when you're running around with 13 engine companies in your 15 station department, right? You got 13 engine companies rolling around with 13 full sets of tools. Well, maybe that's overkill, especially with as quick as we're going, but we always ordered them that way. So we kept putting them on every rig that we got until this group went, hey, first off, financially, that's just a terrible idea, right? Let alone like trying to keep guys trained up on that process. It's hard to train for a bunch of pin jobs with your hydraulic tools when we're getting so populated, people don't go fast enough to need us to cut them out of their cars anymore, right? We get the fender benders because there's traffic everywhere in Washington. So yeah, just that ideology shift was crazy. And as we started doing that, I was shocked how easy it was to get rid of certain things off the rig and how many guys were like, yeah, I've wondered why we carried that for the last 20 years. But sometimes it's just asking the question, and that's what our group did. Like our group just started asking the question, and we were fortunate enough to have a deputy chief that believed in us and was like, yes, like I trust you guys. I mean, obviously we still have to prove it. It wasn't just like blind trust, go do whatever you want, but when we could say, here's what we want to remove. Here is why. Here's the last time it was used.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I got hired, it was
and do you guys
20
have
years ago.
Do you have that kind of data? Like when you're talking about being data rich, do you have the kind of data to say, hey, we haven't used this tool. This does not come off our rig in
Kinda. So the beauty is we're in an era now where all of our chiefs, like any of our upper echelon, like I've worked with them on the rigs, 911 calls, middle of the night, like they're not far removed. Back in the day, we used to kind of have like guys had to promote so young that then they were just up in the office for like 25 years. It's no longer that way. Like we have these relationships and we all know each other very well. In that generation, we didn't have a ton of hiring back then. So you can go to these people like our ops chief or our logistics chief and say, hey, you just got off the rig. Like, you were a battalion chief running calls with us. Like, when's the last time you saw him use the Rescue 42s off the engine company? Right. And they'd be like, oh, well, that was probably never. Yet they were on every rig. So again, like, this is where you have to start making those choices. And we actually found out quickly that most people felt the same way about a lot of the tertiary equipment. It's not that we don't need the equipment. It's that we don't need the equipment on every single.
Yeah. And it's insane how so much of those tools have gotten so much smaller. The other big change, and if you look at the last decade or so in apparatus, all the LED technology that just changes how much energy you need and generator storage and all these kinds of things, that all of a sudden these spaces open up.
Everything's smaller and lighter. Like circ saws, you had the big old steel ones. Now we bought the little 10-inch DeWalt. Like, our truck guys did all the testing on all the battery powered tools. And for what we're going to use it for, like, we're not going to go up on a roof as an engine company with our big steel circ saw and do some coffin cut and drop some commercial cut in, right? We're going to use it for like cutting a lock or a chain link fence.
Right.
So the little battery guy, like, it's a ripper. Like, the thing works really well, weighs like half the weight, takes up half the compartment space. So we really have like an engine focused rig with like one rescue compartment, which again, big change, big ideology.
So how have some of these innovations you described improved your responses?
I mean, again, I think it gets back to kind of delineating the work. So like, truck work and engine work at large departments has been separate for years, right? Like, if you went to Los Angeles and we're like, hey, let me see your hydraulic rescue tools off your engine company, they'd be like, we've never had those, right? Because they had to delineate that work because of how large they are. And so once you get up to like around 400 people where we're at, try training 400 people to be masters of everything, right? I don't know who said it, but they always talk about like, people call 911, expect the fire department to show up, but like some CrossFit neurosurgeon should step off the rig, right? Like, that's what you hope for. Right. It's not what you always get, but that's what you would hope for, right? And so to keep people trained up at all these levels, there's no way you can stay at a proper level of training on every single piece. So I actually think for us, like, improving our responses is really just giving us more of a focus on what our side of the business is.
Yeah.
So like, your paramedics are on paramedic units and they're focusing more on the ALS side of the business, right? The engine guys are focusing on water, stretching lines, throwing a click ladder if we need to, if we first arrive. And the truck guys are search and vent and everything else. And everyone is becoming more professional because it's about taking things away. It's not about adding things, right? And that's kind of actually where this rig, I think, has gained us the most. We didn't add to this rig. We started to take away to make it focus on its life-saving capabilities.
All right. So we talked a little, obviously, about consultants. We talked about Hughes. What other resources did you use to assist with your build process?
Neighboring agencies, friends. Like, the more you get out and about, the more opinions you hear. And sometimes you hear something and you're like, yes, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah. How do you do that? Like, when you mentioned it, it kind of popped into my head when you mentioned Seattle being so near you, and like you're responding to some of the same incidences. What's that balance between like, hey, we have to have a standardized fleet at South County and make these decisions. We're going to be responding to the same fires as Seattle. Like, the balance between having a unique configuration compared to there. I mean, do you run any of those where you're like, hey, we still have to have uniqueness to South County?
Not really. Okay. I think what happens, so, we have everyone has surrounding fire departments. We have the city of Everett to the north. We have Snohomish Regional to our east. Like, we run calls and we all do business a little bit different. Yep. And so I think I wouldn't spec a rig based off of the potential of someone else needing to use it with us on a call.
Right.
I think that comes more back to training, education, and relationships, to where we do regional training and we meet and they've seen our rigs, or we've done drills together before the call ever happens.
Yeah.
Right. So you'll see those people together, and that's kind of how we've overcome that. But no, I don't think we've actually I don't think we've ever been like, maybe we should do this to make sure our neighboring agency can do X, right? Like, sure. Seattle has a lot of cool things. I like most of their rig, right? Their spec. I have friends there that are part of their engine cadres and things like that. And we argue over the minutiae, right? But at the end of the day, we all agree that starting offensive fires on tank water, and the first line being more the most important thing we do as an engine. Well, none of us disagree on that. How we get it there obviously is, becomes a little cultural, a little regional, or like your department versus that department. So
One, I would imagine, to your point, like how you started at the whiteboard and the 3 topics on the whiteboard, that's going to be the same. I mean, I can't imagine like you're going to go and walk into Seattle or any other neighboring agencies and they're going to have some wildly different.
But if we didn't write it up there, like I can't tell you how many ideas came up, and guys are like, "Well, what about?" And I'm like, "Which one on the board?
Right.
Which one on the board are we?" Well, I like it. I feel. Well, we weren't really like I feel, right? I actually think the best thing we did is we actually just made them simpler. Like our last rigs had a foam system with a foam loop with like 8 lines off a single foam loop. Again, not my spec. Someone else spec this years and years ago. And it was problematic because you got 8 lines coming off 1 2.5 inch pipe foam loop. And it was, then the foam system, if it leaks, then it starts eating valves. Our pressure gauges wouldn't read correctly. And we went from like, 15 discharges off the engine down to 9. Why? Because we simplified things into like, what does it actually need? Foam systems, in our experience, they've been problematic for us personally, right? A lot of it, I think, was how we spec'd it because we had so many off of 1. So what did we do? We just decided to get rid of them. So we don't have the foam system. We have the adductor system because that's what we've really done. It's not something we use very frequently. So we just started for us, we started simplifying things. We went back to anything that can be mechanical. We went back to mechanical. We just started taking things away and simplifying processes. And I think it's going to overall build us a rig that has a lot of longevity.
Do you guys, anything on the serviceability side you consider with that too? I mean, I got to imagine when you're simplifying it and making it less complex build, your mechanics and aftermarket team's got to love that.
I think that Lauren, our mechanic, I think he was shocked. So again, part of the build process from the pre meetings that we talked about, Lauren was in the room with us, the guy who runs our shop. And certain things I'd be like, I don't know, Lauren, that's your deal. Like I may not agree with him on what motor and training we decide on. That's okay. That's his world, right? That's his world to decide those things. But yes, he was like, oh, you're getting rid of the foam system. He's like, oh my God, thank you. Like, it's a little less maintenance. Now, if you're a department that, is running like vehicle wrecks and fuel fires up and down your interstates, right? Like in the Midwest where every interstate crosses another interstate. Like, I don't know how you guys get around here. We have a freeway. Anytime I go to the Midwest, I get lost. I could understand why you'd need a big foam system, right? Because you might be the department that's going to all these entrapment wrecks with fire. I'm not kidding you. There's so much traffic. People don't go fast enough to get in a big enough wreck very often. So that's not our world. So when we started talking about these things, we used to run on-spot chains, okay? But we didn't use them very often. They do nothing for you in reverse. And so we were like, well, maybe that's a system. He's like, you're going to get rid of those too? Too many times do you idiots just break those? And it's our fault. It's not anything with how they're built. Like, we, like, firefighters are hard on equipment. We just are.
That's awesome. Well, it's got to be neat too, culturally, kind of having that relationship with your shop. You know what I mean? That's just got to mean that you mentioned Lauren, and that to be involved in that. I mean, is that on his whiteboard too, though? Like, does he know safety, like in protecting people and life safety is like, that's his job too.
Lauren was in the same room. So the original build team that brought the ideas in, the build team kind of changed partway through, and it just happened to do with promotions and people retiring, and like people just moved positions or promoted upwards to where they weren't around for that process anymore. But Lauren was there through the entire thing, including pre-built, right? Like, and he went through from the shop side. It was like, there was plenty of times in our pre-meetings where with Hughes, they were awesome. Like, these meetings of getting your thoughts together well before pre-build is such a big part. Like, I hope anyone that listens to this, because they're going to spec a rig soon, like, have all your stuff written down first. Like, do that exercise before you talk to your vendor. And then Hughes comes in and does it with us. And Lauren was there for every piece of it. And it was easy to just be like, well, what do you want on your approach angle and your cramp this and what tire size? And I was like, I'm not the guy, right? Like, I'm the guy that pulls the hose line and goes inside the building with my firefighter, right? Like, as a captain, what do I know about approach angles? What do I know about tire size? So that's all you kick it to him like, hey, what do you think? Well, I've changed it. We're on a 385, blah, blah. I'm like, it's all foreign to me, right? I just mentally check out and hang out until Lauren's done and makes his decision and then jump back in, right?
And you can imagine how like this complex process of these several meetings going through it, how you could come out with a Frankenstein truck. I mean, you come out with a very complex unit.
Oh, I'm a very confident person.
Yeah, because if you're gonna go through and you're like, they're asking me approach angle, and I'm just gonna answer.
I'm worried at what I screwed up. Like we're gonna go look at it on the blue floor today, right? We're very confident in what we did. Still haven't seen it yet.
That's awesome. So I'm between you and your rig right now, like this podcast.
Yeah.
Oh man,
this is my first stop on our final inspection.
What's coming up and talking
I haven't
about
even
it?
looked at it yet.
Yeah, oh man, that's awesome. Well, thanks for doing that.
No problem.
So what advice would you have for any firefighter that's going to design a pumper?
Again, I would just go back to, for one, like write out whatever, even if it's not a pumper. Like I can talk about ladder trucks, even though I don't like to ride on them. Like if you went in your department and you're building an engine, ladder truck, medic, it doesn't matter. Like write down why it exists. Well, I already know the answer to that. It's life safety. So then you truly have to look at it. Like on the engine side, if you're not looking at the accessibility to your hand lines, right? Because that's the important part. Our offensive interior fire attack is why we exist. Okay. Once we say it's defensive and you do all these lines on the outside, I mean, I want to save their stuff as well, but it's different when you're not having to quickly go in. Like we're a little slower pace and a little more cautious, I guess, during defensive fires on where and what we do. So if you're not speccing your rig based off of its capabilities to save that life in an offensive fire, like if your house catches on fire and there's 2 bedrooms on fire tonight, right? At your own home, I promise you want a rig spec'd more like mine. I just promise you, right? Because it is built to be the quickest stretch of hose, has the amount of tank water to where we have extra time. Like these pumpers have over 700 gallons. That's new to us, but it bought us well over another minute and a half of wide open nozzle flowing water without a hydrant. Okay. So for me, like that means I get to dive deeper into coming to find you or your family, not worrying about making a fire hydrant, right? Someone else is worrying about that. So I would just say like, whatever you're speccing, what is the best thing that it can do? If you're speccing a ladder truck and you use life safety as your driving force, well, then look at it. Then why does it exist? Well, the truck guys need to be really good at search and really good with ladders. So you should probably have as many ground ladders as you possibly can have, right? Because they need to be able to get their ground ladders off quickly and go to windows and VES or grab the victim that's hanging out the window. That's their side of the business. And if it's higher than our ground ladders reach, well, then I'd probably focus on the access of your aerial, right? Like building a raised cab in your ladder truck, probably a bad idea, right? Because it cuts off your angle of how you can reach with these ladders. And you bought it to be a ladder truck. So be very realistic of how does it support the mission is what I would say. Make a mission focused. And then if you're smart and you get your spec ideas, you send them to your trusted friend at your neighboring agency and let him tell you how dumb you are.
Sure.
Right? Like
that's the getting uncomfortable part again.
Totally. And just let them be like, dude, why are you doing this? And here's the thing. They're either going to change your mind or you're going to dig in even harder on like, nah, I believe it even more now. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But either way, it's either going to shore you up or change your mind. Right? Yeah. And just be realistic on what you need. There's one tertiary item on this engine that our group fought hard for. It's kind of tertiary. It's also really good for safety, but the roto ray on the front of our rig, that is not a West Coast thing. And I think it is the best thing for warning them that you're coming. But for us, we picked one item that maybe could have left the spec. Everything else we knew had to be there, right? But that's like our one pride thing for everything we've done. But we also cut a tremendous amount out of the spec by going back to mechanical everything.
Yeah. The part too that I hope people understand, to your point, if they're coming in, they're starting this process, they're interested in speccing a rig, is also just understanding the volume of work. Because I think oftentimes people think, oh yeah, they go out, they go visit a manufacturer, they take them out to dinner, they do all these parts of it. It is just a tremendous amount of work and responsibility doing that. And it's like my favorite part of working at Pierce is this moment right between is when you get to walk on the blue floor and see what that is. And you know, it just means a ton, not just to me, but I mean the 3,000 people that are here in Appleton and in Bradenton that get to do this every day. And so I'm just super appreciative of your business, you guys taking the time to teach us a little bit more, and joining us here on the dispatch. So thanks a ton, Derek.
Yeah, not a problem. It's just a lot of people. There's a lot of work to get you here. Our Chief Curtis, our logistics chief, has put a ton of trust into us. He's kind of mentored us through the process and, given us a lot of rope to make the decisions, right? But also a safety net, when we need to on some of the things that maybe we don't understand. My friend Eric Schaefer here that's on our group has been instrumental in it. We had Chief Todd Weigel, Heller, Anthony Castanis, Andy Lauer, and Genevieve. This is our engine group that has bled for this rig. Yeah. And we're not like, you realize I'm about to go look out on the blue floor, and I've already had 100 people like slaughter us about the changes we made. And it ain't even close to back home yet, right? And that's okay. Like, a lot of work has come to get us to this point. I'm excited to get it. I'm excited for us to be a little uncomfortable. And it's going to drive our department forward. And I'm glad we took the risk, because I think that 15 to 20 years from now, that rig's still going to be running 911 calls. And it's going to just come into its sweet spot. And then some other moron can spend as much time as we did to try to get the other one and make it better than what we did.
That's awesome. Well, it's our job to earn the opportunity to get to work with them. So thanks.
It's probably Eric. He's still going to be here. Yeah, he's still be.
Thanks again for joining us on the dispatch, and thanks a ton for your business.